Mr. Matthew over there is in the control room. He's our producer. If you have any questions today, if you want to talk about any situation, either if it pertains to what we're talking about or not, please throw it in the chat. Let us know, and we'll help you out. And our goal is to equip you to change lives. That's what we really want to do. So by all means, jump in, join us. Hit the subscribe button if you like what we're doing, the little notification bell, and yeah, let's get into it. So today our topic title is Best Defense.
Yes.
Best Defense?
Best
Question
defense.
mark, yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, what's that about?
So last week we talked about working with people who are easily offended. And at the end of the conversation, we started talking about, well, what about the current cultural climate where it seems like people are taking offense on behalf of others? You know, that it's especially...
Yeah, like nothing actually happened to them to be offended about.
Right.
They're taking ownership of somebody else's.
Right, right. And so I believe that that's caused a big culture clash, you know, and kind of a war, a battle between offenses. And so all week I've been thinking about this. We said we would talk about it this week. And what kept coming to me is this line that I thought was something to do with football. You're a football guy. I am not a sports person. But the best defense is a good offense.
Hey, you're good.
Right? I
was ready.
Yeah. They just kept coming to me. And so I looked it up, and actually, you know, the internet attributes quotes to all kinds of people. I saw it attributed first to George Washington on one website, but then the place I found it most attributed to was Jack Dempsey, the boxer. So I don't know. But, you know, I was thinking about where that offense is coming from. You know, you often say, Pastor, one of your one-liners is, I can only be hurt by what I care about. So if I'm getting hurt, if I'm getting offensive or offended, it's something I'm defending. I feel there's some value inside of me. There's something that I hold dear that I'm defending. And so I just thought we might talk about, is that true? Is it true that the best defense is a good offense? Because it seems to be causing more harm than good.
So what would a good offense be in the area of offenses?
A good offense in the area of offenses.
Stay inside your house and don't talk to anybody.
That's a great idea. And didn't we do that during COVID?
Yeah, that didn't work at all.
It didn't make anything
stay
better.
Off the internet.
It didn't make anything better.
If you don't talk to anybody or anything.
Don't watch the news.
Right. Yeah, if you just stay inside a bubble, nothing will happen. But then you might even offend somebody for not like reaching out.
Or
it's crazy.
How about if we only talk to people who agree with us all the time?
Yes. Are we on the right track here?
That's what our culture is trying to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to get everybody on the same page, speaking exactly the same thing so that nobody gets offended. And you have that picture. I'm going to take it to the place we actually have gotten to where we almost take value in victimhood. So when I'm actually struggling with all kinds of different things like this, that almost gives me a sense of worth. We really have gone to, wow, if you're the broken one, if you're the hurt one, you had a really difficult life. Therefore, we'll get into a language, the world owes me.
A poor you situation.
So now the world owes me. So victimhood has really taken on a status symbol in terms of leveraging the relationships around you. That really gets us into a difficult place in terms of how we handle cultural situations.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this, you know, because I grew up with more of the attitude of, okay, yeah, you were kicked, get up, dust yourself off, let's go do something, either go do something else, or, you know, it's the get up attitude. But there is a sense of this, oh, poor you, you know, let's dwell in our woundedness.
Mm-hmm.
And the victimhood culture really is that what happens to me is incredibly powerful. And that's where I come back to my one-liner, what flows through you sticks to you. And we talked about Luke 6:38 in one of the live streams, where the idea that the most powerful force in your life is what flows through you and what you give out. people are made in the image of God, so when you're giving out pride, you're going to get a common response back. When you're giving out bitterness, you're going to get a response back.
Right.
Most people made in the image of God, when they react to a bitter person, it's going to be pretty similar in terms of the way that happens. So we have a culture who has shifted from believing in get up, dust yourself off, move on. If you move on and you behave in certain kinds of ways, your behaviors will have more to do with your future than what everybody else is doing to you. And we have really shifted to more of a victim culture, to where now, oh, what everybody else is doing to me is much more powerful. There is no way I can overcome what everybody else is doing to me. My life is no longer powerful, so then I go into victimhood status, and I try to barter. I try to leverage my victimhood status to get you to treat me in a better way so that I can have a better life.
Right. I mean, it's being institutionalized, actually, and taught to our children through critical race theory, through intersectionality, where we are divided now into two classes. There are the oppressed and there are the oppressors. And everyone needs to stand up for the oppressed and beat down the oppressors. And I do think that you're so right on with it. There's an empowerment for the ones who are standing up for the oppressed as well. You know, like it's giving an identity not only to the victims, but those who are standing up for them. So I have a personal stake and a personal value attached to standing up for the little guy.
Well, if you go to critical race theory, it's basically whites that are being challenged. And so if I happen to be a white person and I want to move into a good place, then I have to be seen as standing up for the oppressed. And if I can identify politically, if I can identify, I'm not going to say spiritually because that's a whole different ballgame, but if I can somehow line myself up with one of those causes that puts me into a place where, oh, I'm on the side of the oppressed, exactly what you said. That's how I move out of the oppressor class into the class that now has status, because the status largely are those who are either are of the oppressed class or standing with those who are of the oppressed class. Now,
I think they call that virtue signaling.
Virtue signaling, that would be correct. Now, all of that literally goes away. Again, one verse, Matthew 6:38. What is the most powerful force in your life? And if you go back to a good defense is a good offense, what I've seen, the more I labor in victim status, even if I'm coming alongside victims, and frankly, that's what we do. We do in the ministry. I work with drug addicts, alcoholics. I don't allow them to stay in their victim status. It's like, to some extent, it's like what you were saying. Get up, dust yourself off. Let's get this thing headed in the right direction. If you stay there, if you continue to do what you've always done, this is a good AA saying, you will continue to get what you've always gotten. So if you lay there and stay there in victim status, nothing is going to change.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about the people who identify with different people groups for the status of it. Mm-hmm. They're not actually the ones that are hurt. What does that do spiritually when they're taking on something that's not theirs?
Well, it depends. Are they actually taking it on, or back to what Matthew brought in, are they virtue signaling? And a lot of times virtue signaling among the wealthy is, okay, I'm going to give a gift. Okay, now that I've given a gift, I've done my virtue signaling thing, and now I'm going to continue to stay in my lifestyle of privilege. So there is that thing that's just tokenism, which to me, I mean, you talk about sick, that's sick. Or there is true identification. And I'm going to go back to, in Christianity, one of the most powerful doctrines that we should be talking about, that I know that almost nobody even understands the word, is the word identification. So if I'm going to do real identification, I'm going to talk Mother Teresa instead of virtue signaling. Mother Teresa left what she had, went into the poverty zone, and lived right there amongst them. Now, she did come back out. She communicated with people. She raised money to take it back in. But the majority of her life was just totally entrenched. It was totally identified with those who were struggling. That's one level of working in this area. And if you're talking about people who come along and identify in order to come alongside and build up and lift up, wow, that's powerful. If you're talking about virtue signaling and, wow, I'm going to have the right political point of view, and I'm going to have these talking points while my own lifestyle is just like radically far away from that, I'm not too impressed by that.
Mm-hmm. So what happens, let's bring it down to like personal level, because we're getting into the areas of like, I don't know, back down to personal level. Okay, so when something happens to, say, my child, and I don't like it, and I get offended on behalf of my child or my family member, what does that do spiritually?
You get offended. I just had to say that.
You're not going where I want you to go, David.
Okay, well, I am kind of hard to lead, aren't I?
You are. You're very hard. You were talking last week about, and I think we have a comment, so I'll be quick, how when you actually have an offense, like there's something that's been done to you, you can allow the grace of God to cover it. Mm-hmm. But if it's not actually done to you.
Well, you're talking about taking an offense, and I think we kind of shirked that last week saying that we were out of time. So I really do want to come back to that, but why don't we go to the comment first, and then we will hopefully remember to come back to it this time.
Yeah, so we got a YouTube comment, and Plain Jane wants to know, do you think so much of society's rejection of Christ or the rejection of their identity in Christ is why people are clinging so hard to other identities? How do we help people recognize this with all these offense issues that we've been talking about?
Well, it's no longer a good thing to be identified as a Christian, is it?
You run into that. I'm going to respond to the question and comment in terms of if you're really talking identity in Christ, and a little bit ago, remember I talked about identification. If you really are talking identity in Christ, I'm going to have a sense of security. I'm going to have a sense of purpose. I'm going to have a sense of meaning. People who have that sense of purpose and meaning are much less likely to get offended. Most of the time, people who struggle with offense are people who don't know who they are, who struggle with who they are, where they are. So if you're talking not just a doctrine, if you're talking a doctrine, again, let's go back to virtue signaling. If you're talking people who have the doctrine of Christ, but that walk with God hasn't filtered in, it's not deep, they're going to be insecure, and out of insecurity, they're going to try to control other people and force other people to believe what they believe, and you're going to get into those kinds of zones. So your insecure people, they can't sit down. If I'm insecure, I have to convince you to believe what I believe. So it becomes almost a dominating sort of approach. That's what's become offensive to our society. I don't believe it's necessarily the doctrines, it's the people, it's the spiritual stuff that's emanating out of the people that is anything from insecurity to control to belittling of I'm better than you. If you're really walking in Christ, how can you walk in I'm better than you?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
So how do we help people then recognizing, instead of taking these labels, racist, victim, oppressed, all of these things, how do we help them recognize that they have an innate worth and value in Christ so that we can get rid of all of that other nonsense, all of those offenses?
I was thinking about this as I was thinking about the show, and for me, I go back to Paul, and he said, I preach Christ and him crucified. If that's my message, that I am a sinner, I'm a sinner who struggled with all of these things, and I am, who struggled with addiction, same-sex attraction. I've been delivered from all of those things through the power of Christ crucified. It's my testimony. It's my testimony that he will deliver others to. Instead of putting myself up on a high pedestal, which is what people have come to expect from Christians, just they've come to expect bigotry and judgment. And I know before I got saved, that's what I didn't think that about Jesus, but I sure thought that about a lot of the people that I saw in church. But when I hear somebody who'll come to me with their own sin, will come to me with their own contrite heart and spirit, that I can connect with.
That's why I love a basic doctrine that we talk about in the heart change model, that you are sold into slavery under sin, so to speak, and that part isn't appealing to anybody. But the second part of it is, unless you're drawing strength from God, from godly people, unless you're drawing in strength from the outside, you don't have what you need to get where you need to go. If that's your belief system, when I come to you, I'm not coming to you high and mighty. In fact, I'm coming to you, and you and I can both attest to this, and I'm sure you can as well. There's hardly a day that goes by that it's not a struggle.
Yeah.
And so I wake up on a given day, and it's like, how am I going to walk this out? And frankly, the best answer is I can't. Unless I get connected to God, draw strength. Unless I'm connecting with the people God wants me to connect to, draw strength. Then I can't do what God's called me to do today. That basic understanding creates a level of humility. How can I come to you high and mighty at that point? It's virtually impossible. That's just a whole different world. But what we have in our Christianity, and this is part of why this is my life passion, we have more of a works/intellectual Christianity where I studied these doctrines. I know these doctrines. I'm going to tell you these doctrines. I have chosen these works. Why, look at me. Look at the works that I've done. See, both an intellectual approach and a works approach generate that pride where I come to you better than you. Whereas the approach that I'm talking about, when I really believe and understand that I'm sold under slavery to sin, and when I believe God's called me to love my enemies.
Yeah.
Do you have any enemies? When he says, I
don't think you're really a Christian if you don't, honestly.
Okay. But when you've got people firing off at you and you're like, oh, God's called me to love these people.
Yep.
And you're realizing when you wake up, I don't have it in me to do today what God's called me to do. I mean, that changes the spiritual nature of the message. And when you hear the political discourse that's wound up inside of Christianity and all of the different things going on in our culture, you don't get that spiritual feel.
Well, it's been so politicized, you know. I speak with my son, who God has miraculously reunited us, you know, and he's becoming through prayer, honestly, through my prayer, he's becoming more and more open-minded to this Christian thing, this Bible thing that mom's into now. You know, he's coming at it from a very skeptical, where I think a lot of people are, a very skeptical, wounded place. And he'll often use the term evangelicals. Well, these evangelicals do this. And I'm like, honey, you're talking about a political party. You're not talking about, this is a political faction that has called themselves the evangelicals. And that's not what evangelical means, you know.
What's interesting, it actually is a descriptive term that has come to be used by a variety of people to try to lump people together so that you can speak about them collectively.
Yes.
So I don't know that I would agree that it's a political party, but it is a description. And a lot of people in the political realm have grabbed a hold of it and do go with it. So yes. Now, I'm going to take you back to what you said. Your son's responding. Why is he responding? I believe the greatest power is spiritual, and it is connection. And so you've come to him. You're wanting to get to know him. You're speaking with him. You're loving on him. We tend to think inside of our spiritual flows. Now, are there strongholds? Can you be taught things that become sacred things to you that you won't allow your thoughts to be touched in that area? We all have sacred cows, if you will. So you've got these strongholds, but you tend to think the pressure on your brain is to think within your spiritual flows. So when you're coming along and you're connecting and you're building relationship, you're not even arguing. You're not even talking theology. You're just loving on him as he feels that loving. There's this pressure just pulling him over towards you to where, whoa, maybe I better think about what she's saying. Maybe I better listen to what she's saying. And I believe that we've turned it into a pure argument, which ends up being an intellectual power game. Well, you know, I've done intellectual power games with people and haven't seen hardly any change at all, and I've relationship to people. And so when you come back and you start dealing with that question, it's like, well, how do we do this? I hate to be the guy, but it's almost like you don't. You know, I mean, at some level, we need statesmen. We need statesmen. I write articles. We need statesmen who can state these things in clean terms and clear terms so that the arguments are made, and God calls us to rightly divide the word and to have an answer to those who are there. So I'm not saying you can't do it at all. You can, and we need to.
But there's that moment when the honest question comes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, be ready for the honest question, not the argument that you faced with a stranger in the grocery store.
Right.
You're talking, that's the moment when a relationship develops to the point that they honestly are asking you, like, this is a real thing. I've seen real change.
And if they're asking you, you said the key word, I've seen real change. When Christ is having an impact in our lives and they see us in crisis and they see us handling crisis well, and we're walking through these, I've seen you. And those are powerful words. I've seen you. I'm going to ask an honest question. Now we have an open door. If you're having debates about some of these different issues, for the most part, the Bible over and over again don't have anything to do with the useless arguments.
Right.
And a lot of the time, that's where it goes. It devolves into useless arguments. Now, how do we know the difference between, wow, I'm going to use the word statesman again. I'm not sure that I even like it, but I'm being,
A defender.
Whatever. I'm not shrinking back. I'm speaking truth. I'm doing what I need to do versus when I'm over here, hey, you know, it's time to just kind of push that away right now and relationship, you know. There's a learning curve there trying to figure out which one should I be doing and what should that look like.
Yeah, I looked up 2 Corinthians 10, talking about, it's 10:3 and 5, Matthew, because I was thinking about, okay, so, well, the first thing I thought about was Ephesians 6:12, for our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? But then in 2 Corinthians 10:35, 10:3 through 5, Paul writes, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. You know, because I was thinking, like, how do I do that? Okay, I get that conceptually, that I'm not battling flesh and blood. I'm sitting across from somebody who sees things differently, picking a fight, whatever, taking offense. But how do I get to that place where I'm above that, sort of taking a God's eye view, a spiritual, and recognizing,
They're realizing that this isn't
fighting.
the person. It's not the person.
This is not us, and not be carnal and in the flesh in that warfare.
I'm going to go back to one of my one-liners. That's not really a one-liner, it's a question. Where's your spirit right now? If you're entering into an argument, and especially if you're insecure, if you're entering in and you're insecure with the I need to win this argument, what message is actually being sent to that other person?
Right.
And then we go back to, I really do want to get back to your question about, you know, we've got these offenses at a personal level. I would, if I could somehow just pixie dust and all insecurity was gone, guess what would happen to offenses? Almost all offenses come out of my struggle with worth And so now I'm going to get offended at you, and we're going to have a value battle here over who's right and who's wrong and who deserves time and attention and everything else. Almost all offenses come out of that sense of worth. So if you listen to what I'm talking about here today and you think about it at a cultural level, what aggravates the victim status? Well, I'm going to take it back to families and broken families and moms and dads who have worth, sow worth into their kids. They just kind of do it instinctively and automatically. Moms and dads who come out of broken families who are struggling with worth, who have no sense of purpose, who have no sense of meaning. How do I get worth? Well, it's time, it's attention from people who have a sense of worth. They get that sown into them. Well, if I don't have that sown into me, now I'm looking for attention. And think about the bad kid. I taught school. Think about the bad kid. He's going to get attention one way or the other. Mm-hmm. You have these kids. It's like, if I can get attention being good, I'll be good. Oh, I can't get attention being good, I'll be bad.
Right.
And that's, we crave attention for the sake of worth. You go back to victim status, that's what happens. You go back to, your kids fighting with each other. Well, mm-hmm. Guess what? It's really a battle for worth. I love watching my grandkids. This one's kind of funny. I have decided this thing. I've said it before. Do you know how little girls play? Little girls in general like to give you orders. At least this is how they play with me. All the granddaughters give you orders. And if you follow their orders, they feel like they've had a good day.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we play teacher. We play mom. Absolutely. We put you in your place.
My daughter, for her birthday, wants a yes day. And I was like, no. Yeah.
And little boys basically are kind of go your own way. I'm out here. I'm in the bold horizon creating my own way. So you get the little boys and the little girls, and the little girls are all trying to, we're going to play this way. And then the other little girl, no, we're going to play this way. And I mean, they're like fighting back and forth to define the rules. They don't care about the rules. They just, in their form of play, what do they want? They want some sense of worth. And if my sense of worth isn't being taken care of here, then I don't feel good. So then I do it louder. I do it harsher. Oh, well, then we go to tears. Well, then we go to tattling. Then we go to, kids play it out very well. And it really comes down to the insecurity piece. And one of my sons was interesting that way. If he got lap time, he was amazing. If he didn't get lap time, he was uncontrollable. I mean, it's just crazy how, if we could translate this, how do we have a big hug nationwide and lap time? Well, guess what? Lap time doesn't work because you can't give away what you don't have. So lap time doesn't work unless or until you have somebody who's actually receiving from God, receiving from godly people, in a way that, hey, let's sit down and let's have some lap time, not physical lap time, but time where you and I talk. And you have a sense of, oh, wow, I'm saying that you're worth my attention. You're worth my time. Let's just hang out together and let's spend a little bit of time together. That's a powerful agent of change in people's lives.
And I was just thinking, and it's not only like a parent-child relationship. It could be having healthy friendships. It doesn't have to be a vertical thing. It can be, a side-by-side thing, a friendship or something like that. So, but yeah. As you were talking, I was just thinking about my kids because, they're here all the time. It's summer. They're just around all the time. And I love them dearly. But I kind of want to kill them a little bit. Just a little.
Careful
just
with
for
your
5
language
minutes.
here.
I know. I love them.
You're
that
gonna have
would not
somebody
happen.
coming after you here.
I know.
If you're not.
I know. But you're right. Like it's my daughter, her desire is to be heard because I recognize that from myself. She wants to be heard, and my son, he don't care anything about what she's saying. It just goes in one ear, out the other, completely ignoring her, and she gets louder.
It sounds like a lot of married couples I know.
It does. Yeah. And so it's like this kind of, it just like one-upping each other until it's like, I'm just about ready to lose my mind.
Well, actually, if I were to describe it, yes, the girl one-ups, the boy ignores.
He just maintains his ignoring.
And he understands that every time he ignores, he's winning. And so you've got this battle going back and forth that's just classic. And I see it all the time. I mean, you see these roles and these responses, and it's like, wow. So you end up at a cultural level. You end up with people who struggle with value unless or until we find a way to reestablish the relationship. And obviously, I would start with the God relationship. And the God relationship isn't a set of doctrines. Mm-hmm. I think this is where people have gotten offended. Now, should it be doctrinal? Well, let's just start here. Simple question. Is God? Or change it around. God is. So if there is a God is, there is something called real. There is something called reality. If you're not in the middle of reality, you're in a false zone. You're in a false world. So should it have doctrine? Absolutely it should. There is a reality there. And frankly, to me, everything, if you really want to simplify it and get it back to a place that is good, I read the scriptures to see the character of God.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you have a living God who is interacting with people in a specific situation. That's why the command in Leviticus can be completely negated in Deuteronomy and turned around, because I'm talking to you as a person. God describes himself as the Trinity. I'm talking to you as a person with a character, now talking to a human being in a real person, real situation. It's not about a set of rules. It's not about a set of laws. Right religion comes to understand the character of God and who he is and how he responds in what situations. Well, now we're in a much more of a relationship zone. That's healthy. But
it becomes more about the spirit of the law than the letter of the law. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, and I was thinking, I think where a lot of Christians fall short today is they're just following a rule maker. Mm-hmm. They're following rules and a rule maker and doing through works. And they're not, I don't think they expect to have a relationship at the level that God wants to have a relationship with them. Like, I don't think it even crosses their mind. I was reading in 1 Samuel this morning about when God calls Samuel, and he misses it 3 times. And he thought it was an audible call. He completely misses it 3 times. And it's how common is that to us that we miss it, even when God is there reaching out to us,
Well, learning those experiences, entering into relationship, it's a learning process over a period of time, and having people there to encourage you. I mean, in that case, Eli, of course, at some point goes, hello, Samuel, this is what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's not me, it's God. You've got to figure out the voice of God. You have to work through that. These are all steps that we take together. But what's happened, back to what you were saying, you get this vertical approach of, I know God's truth. I'm going to share God's truth with you. You need to completely agree with me. What I find in the approach that I have is I'm not capable of knowing God. His ways are higher than my ways. So I'll gladly share with you what I've learned. I'll gladly bring the scriptures to you, open them, we'll study. But I believe in a God who reveals himself to all people. So I'm going to take you seriously because you have an ability to hear from God. You have an ability to study the scriptures. Yeah, I may start off as the teacher, but at some point I want no longer teacher-student relationship. How about if we come into peer relationships where we're working with one another and mentoring one another? These are the kinds of principles that if you're operating from this point of view, you don't create the victim status. And if someone comes to you in victim status, hopefully at some point, that's part of why we do the Heart Change Handbook. Hopefully at some point, they begin to realize, oh, what flows through me is incredibly powerful. My victim status just leaves me over here a lump that'll never get better, whining and complaining the rest of my life. Why would I choose victim status when I can begin to live a life that is much more powerful?
Sounds like a good place to jump in. Okay. We had a comment. Charlotte seemed to have agreed with you when you were talking about the grandchildren. She said, "Isn't it true? Sometimes later in life, the little girls are just now bigger and they want to play in that holier way with the same bossy attitude. They know better, but the message is the same as when they were little."
I don't think they do. Because it at some point worked and they just keep using the same tool. Like, why would you change the tool you're using if it's working great? Like, if yelling works, why change?
So
I don't think...
Is this a testimony that yelling works in your life?
I don't know.
It was funny when you were talking about that, though, because I was seeing my kids exactly in each way that you were describing. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense why my daughters are doing that.
No, it is crazy. As Grandpa, they call me Papa. As Papa, literally, that's their form of play. They don't care what I do as long as I'm responding to them at that level and in that way. And now it's play. And it doesn't matter if they're asking me to stand on my head or chase them or swing them or whatever. Okay, you're going to come swing me right now. Okay, now we're going to go over here. And we're going to play a form of tag, and oh no, this is base, so you can't touch me. I mean, it's like it doesn't matter what set of rules are set. They have to be changing the rules because they have to see that you're responding to their changing the rules so that they can feel good about it. I mean, we can't just play a game with a set of rules. The rules have to continually be changing so that they're saying, "Oh yeah, I still have my power. Yep, it's working.
Man.
It's working."
I'm hearing you talk about all this, and I'm thinking about my relationship with my husband. I have the best day when he does whatever I tell him to do.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I just had a light bulb go off. Like, I really did.
Yeah, so you're
like,
just...
if he tells me, "I'm sorry, honey, I know we didn't talk about this, but I had this plan to do this other really important and valuable thing to do."
And it might have even been important and valuable. And you might have even acknowledged
and I can agree, but the fact that he's not following what I'm telling him to do is like, it's painful. Like, there's no reason for it to be painful, but it actually hurts. Like, oh, you're not going to do what I tell you to.
And that really goes back to, it really is shaped around everything that we do, every way we respond is shaped around who God created us to be. And again, people argue with this, all of this is thrown out. It doesn't exist anymore, except it does exist. Women in general, again, different degrees, different amounts. Some men have it too, etc. But women in general have that nurturing, caregiving role. So how can I do the nurturing, caregiving role if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to respond to me? So there's that need, that instinctive need to be that guidance person, that director person. And so if I'm interacting with you and you're responding to me, that gives me feedback that, wow, I'm really doing this the right way in terms of who God created me to be. Now, again, all of this subconscious, they don't realize it, especially with the grandkids. They just order you around and feel pretty good about it if you're following them.
So, yeah, I'm thinking about this on coming back to our cultural implications of that same idea and what Ashley was sharing about. It's a good day when, and I'm just going to expand this, when the world is acting how I want it to.
Right.
Whether that's
when they're listening,
a husband, a coworker,
it's like
a roommate.
Colors are brighter when that happens.
Or, and so what I've seen in a few few different times in my life. The first time I remember was the presidential election in 2012, when I got literally physically sick. I mean, just the whole week leading up. And I was laying in bed with a fever, sick, and I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed. And all I can see, and most of my friends are politically aligned with where I was. We're like-minded, right? And all of it is me. I'm right, they're wrong. I'm right, they're wrong. In fact, what when I was praying about it this weekend, what God spoke to me was, yeah, it's the pulpit of I'm right, you're wrong. That's the pulpit. You know, and even though now a lot, because I've become a Christian since then, my political views and my spiritual views have shifted quite a bit. I still hold a lot of the same values, but I just see things through a whole different lens because God just came into my life in a very powerful way and changed everything about the way that I think and see. But my values have stayed the same. Well, I was noticing the other day that my news feed has done the same thing. And I started realize I got to do something about this. I don't need to be reinforced in this idea. I'm right, you're wrong. We've been called to unity. We've been called to love. That's how Christ said that they would know that you belong to me, is through love. And yeah, so I just started going through and unfollowing. You know, I'm just, I love y'all, and we do see things the same way, and that may not be a great thing all the time. Maybe I don't need all that reinforced constantly, that I'm right, you're wrong.
I think they term that one too. That's an echo chamber.
Yeah.
You know all these fancy terms, Matthew. I am not up on the terms.
That's what I'm here for.
That's what he's here for.
There you go. There you go. As you were talking, though, I was thinking about even, I spoke about my marriage and about how when he does what I want, that's great. But it's exactly right. You're talking about unity. Like, he and I are called to be one flesh. And there's a definite difference between he and I are marching to our own beats and doing our own thing than when we are one. Yeah, I can almost feel it.
Yes.
It's almost a physical feeling of when we're one and when we're not. Like, and
the body of Christ is the same. For he talks about it, and Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 12, that how can I look at the hand and say I don't need you? We need every single aspect, every part, every interpretation, every, it's
not
really,
every interpretation.
Oh, well.
Just saying.
he gotcha.
Yeah, thank you. It doesn't mean I have to believe every interpretation. I'm to seek for myself, but I do see, I understand what you mean, Matthew. I'll also say, though, the way I became even open-minded to the Bible was through metaphysical Christianity, which there's a part of me today that's like, oh my God, it's a terrible heresy. And yeah, but it opened me up to the Bible. It opened me up to it. So God even used that. He will take what the enemy means for evil and use it for his good. And that's exactly what he did for me.
Amen.
I do feel like we've kind of totally missed one particular piece, and that goes back to the offenses. And I just want to say this piece. We talked about on a previous program, you can't be offended unless you choose to be offended. And frankly, when you're choosing offense, there's a simple choice. There's either the grace of God, the presence of God, or the offense. And if you hang on to the offense, the temple part of you cannot freely interact with the presence, love, grace of God. Doesn't mean God's gone. It means he turns into a convicting force at that point instead of a partnering force. He's kind of there like, hello, this is not me. You're not going to have my power. You're not going to have my favor. Is this really the way you want to live? So when I choose offense, I shut that down. But if I actually choose the grace of God, and the Holy Spirit's right there offering that empowerment, offering that ability to overcome, many times we're just not willing to let go of that offense. Now, when you talk about people who take offenses, you go a whole different level, because here's what happens. You get offended at me. And so you and I, at some point, we decide that we're going to work our problems out, and we work it out, and it's all good. But Heather's over here watching how I treated you. And it obviously was me treating you, okay? She's watching how I treated you, and she's like, I can't believe he did that. Well, at some point, we work it out. You're good with God. I'm good with God. The grace of God is at work. Forgiveness is at work. What happens to Heather over here? She doesn't know that we have worked it out, and frankly, doesn't really care, because we created pain in her. She was a mercy person, or she cared about one of us in terms of relationship. So her pain is still hanging around over there. And so she's over here just flat angry. And what's interesting, it's almost like the grace of God can't work at that point, because she's trying to figure out whether there should have been forgiveness between us, should be relationship. I mean, she's over here. The only way she's going to get better is repenting for taking the offense. Yeah. And so when you have this victimhood status in our culture, we're not repenting for taking offense. We're glorifying taking offense. The grace of God is not there. The empowerment of God is not there. So we're glorifying victim status, which means we're glorifying taking an offense. And there's no solution for that other than the culture as a whole, individuals or whatever, stepping back going, when I take an offense in someone else's world, I'm setting myself up for misery, because there's not there's just no way out of this one. There's not a kiss and make up moment. There's not a solution moment. So I'm over here as the bystander, left in a mess. That's where our entire culture is right now.
Well, and it makes problems too, because usually the person who has the offense is going to start squawking in some manner of something needs to be done, or this was awful, and it just re-stirs up the whole pot sometimes.
Well, and offenses are easily passed. Again, go back to insecurity, go back to brokenness, woundedness. Wherever there's woundedness, wherever there's insecurity, once I'm offended, I'm going to strike a chord in somebody else's brokenness, woundedness, insecurity. When I strike that chord, what do? We respond to something that spiritually feels like it's the same. So now I've got brokenness. I've got broken families. So I've got brokenness and woundedness all over culture. If I'm over here screaming about, how dare you treat these people this way, I've got tens of millions of people who are resonating with that. And they're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that resonates with me.
Right, because we've all been bullied. We've all been rejected. We've all been judged. Absolutely. Yeah, so it's pulling on that part of me that is like, oh, I know what that feels like.
So you have an entire culture at this point that's basically trafficking, and I choose that word right because it's the same as drug trafficking. It's trafficking in offenses because it gets a powerful response. It gets an agreement response. I'm going to take it back what you said with your husband. When he agrees with you, you're having a good day. The colors are good. Life is good. And so you're going through all of that. Same thing happens at the cultural level. If I'm struggling with insecurity, I have people. Let's go to Facebook and we've got likes. I've got people who are liking me, who are agreeing, who are making positive comments. I mean, just breathe it in. The fact that people are in agreement with me gives me a false sense of healing, a false sense of life in my insecurity, a false sense of power in my woundedness. And so the more people I can collect to that woundedness party, the better I feel. And that's really what we've got going culturally today all over the place.
Yeah, like, oh good, a sick world approves of my sickness.
So, okay. Yesterday, I was in a situation where I saw 3 little kids, and there's 2 boys, and they were blocking the bathroom to a little girl. She was trying to get into the girl's bathroom, and they were blocking it for her. And, I mean, I'm sitting there minding my own business, and I see this. But there was this moment that rose up in me that said, this ain't gonna happen. And so my mama part of me rose up, and I went over there and I said no, and I addressed the little boys and said, and they they moved out of the way. So, obviously that didn't happen to me. I wasn't hurt by it. But in that moment, she couldn't defend herself. She couldn't do anything for herself. Where's the line between being offended and taking action and squawking and fighting for a weaker person that actually needs the help?
Well, was one of the other mamas there, and did that other mama get offended at you, and did you get into trouble?
Luckily, no.
Situations are complex, and that's part of why I ask that question, because when I intervene, sometimes I create all kinds of offenses, all kinds of directions, and how dare you say that to my kid, and so you develop that. Culture is complex. The answer in that situation, God has a character. There is something called righteousness. There is right behavior. You had the ability to help save, intervene. I see that as a positive in terms of the entire picture. But we all see, think, feel inside of where we're at spiritually at any given moment. You bring 3 or 4 people into that situation, you might have had a mama fight. Before it was all over. And so that's one thing that I like, having worked with drug, alcohol, crazy worlds where nothing's ever clean, and you really do have to back it up a little bit, think about it, think about your words, think about when to intervene, when not to intervene. So
maybe even motives behind why you'd be intervening.
Yeah, and so you have that. In terms of the big picture, that's just natural instincts. That's right living. But I'm sure somebody could have come along and said, "How dare you do that? You're overstepping your bounds," and et cetera. That's where you get into cultural values and the clash of cultural values. And you're trying to figure out, okay, now how do we all agree to live together? We were actually thinking we would go into multiculturalism in some other places. I think that ship has sailed. We probably won't go there, but you can see how if you take that and you spread it to a larger thing, all of a sudden you got all kinds of cultural clash going on. And you have to have a basis for making decisions. And that's really what's at war in our culture right now. We're trying to figure out what basis on which to make decisions. At once upon a time, the Bible and morality and the, quote, Christian nation, et cetera, was a significant part of that basis. Now, there are people who would argue in the area of slavery and et cetera that we totally forsook our Christian culture, and that's a fair statement. Yeah. But we at least had a common set of values that were common, that were agreed upon by most people. We're in a time frame right now where
I feel like it's all up in the air.
Yeah, it's all over the place. And so that's where ultimately you really have to get back to relationship, and you have to build relationship. You need to build worth and security and all of those pieces into, and frankly, that happens more at an individual level than it does at a national political discourse level.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that probably wraps up our show for today. So, okay. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here. Once again, if you liked what we're talking about, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you have any questions between now and next Tuesday, please visit our website, heartchangeu.com. You can go down and leave a comment, leave your question, anything you want us to address, please contact us.
And that's Tuesday for this group, but I'll be back on Friday, and so you can jump in on that live stream as well, Friday at the same time at the 12:30 time frame.
Yeah, throw him a really hard one. Find a hard question and send it to him. He needs it.
Stump the chump.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.